My name is Chris, and I am developing the PortageApp. And this is the very first weekly or perhaps fortnightly development update. So, welcome again. You can see on the screen we've got a little bit of an agenda to get through today. And I'd like to spend a bit of time just on introducing the platform. So there's not much to really show because I haven't built much yet. But the idea is that looking out into the marketplace and in understanding some of the problems that I know some people have, there doesn't seem to be a lot of tools or experiences that are out there to help people really understand problems, to look around their environment and understand how things are changing, and then to help them create a response to that problem. Now, that problem could be anything like developing a strategy. For example, a corporate strategy. You could think of that as a very long-running problem-solving process. It could also be just simply starting a project, or it could be a problem within how a team's working. The point being that there seems to be a process that we tend to go through, which is around understanding and then formulating some options, and then developing those options into something that's going to work, and then deploying them, and then gathering some feedback. There seems to be a lot of tools out there that are at the framework level, so more of a conceptual tool, less of something that you can actually use. There's a lot of tools that are out there in the, let's say, execution space. So once you have your approach, tools to help you deploy them into a team or into an organization. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of tools out there to help people think. And I think that's an area worth exploring. And that's what I'm hoping to build with Portage. But we'll have to figure out, is it actually something that people want? Is it something that people will use? And is it something ultimately that people are going to pay for? So this video is a way for me, one, to help get my ideas into the world, but also better understand what you, potentially my customers, want to see. But then also provide an update so you can see how the app is developing and start to understand what it may do. So let's talk about discovery. What I'm doing at the moment is spending a lot of time talking with potential customers. So I'm finding people who do strategy in their day-to-day. That might be their role, or it might be something that they do from time to time, and trying to understand what are their problems and where are they finding gaps. And some interesting themes are emerging. There's quite a lot of interest in finding ways of doing, let's say, what we call an environment scan. So better understanding what's out there in the environment. And something that I discovered today was that there is an appetite to try to test these types of environment scans for things like the unknown unknowns. And I think that this is actually something that is something that a tool like what I'm planning on building could be great for. There's other things like how to make sense of all the information that's being found. So something like a workbench that could help a group of people work together on what have they found, what does it mean, what the impacts might be. Because oftentimes these things get shared through emails or potentially stored in a like an online repository. And really the modality of going through that is having to read and understand yourself, or perhaps there's a team that goes and digests this information and gives you the summary. So I'm going to continue talking to potential customers and understanding these problems. I'm hoping to do that for probably another 5 or 6 weeks, so to the end of June, to really understand where there may be opportunities to provide a solution. So the other thing I wanted to show today is the app architecture. So if you're not a technical person, then you probably can skip over this section. But I think it's worth touching base on for a couple of reasons. You know, there's something about how you build a tool. So a tool shapes how you use it, and how you want to use something shapes the tool. And so I think it's actually kind of important to have the right architecture for the tool. So let's have a quick look, and then we'll give you a little bit of a demo of where we are so far. So before we get into what the architecture of the app is, let's talk through some key principles, because I think before you start designing things like an architecture or making choices, you need to understand what values or what information are you using to inform what those choices are. So we've got 3 really simple principles, and I'll explain each one. So the first one's pretty obvious: keep things simple. And the reason why that's number 1 is I'm a single person doing this. I don't have a team. I can only do this a couple days a week because I have other commitments. I've got young kids and they're involved in sports. So I've got lots of time commitments to keep. And to make progress in this space, I really got to keep things simple. So that's keeping the tools that I choose very simple, keeping the approaches that I take very simple, keeping the amount of work that I've got going very simple. It's really about every time I look at something, there's always exciting new technologies to look at, potentially to use, and building a tool like this, I think you really just have to keep things as simple as possible. My number 2 principle is to find leverage points. So as I mentioned, a lot of constraints, and I need to find ways of taking what little time and effort I can dedicate to this and having a maximum impact for that. So for me, this is should be not a surprise to many people, but I'm using things like AI, specifically code generating AI, to help me create this app. And that goes back to why I want to keep things simple. So there's certainly different frameworks or different technologies that I could use that might be more advanced, might have newer approaches to them. But I am specifically making choices in what platforms and what tools and which frameworks to use that are the simplest tools possible. They may not be the best. They may not be the fastest. They may not be a range of things, but they're the simplest tools. They also tend to be the ones that are the most popular. And the reason why I'm choosing those tools is that they'll have the best coverage in the AI models and also in online reference materials. So, how-tos and so on, developer training, all of that kind of stuff. So by keeping things as simple as possible, I maximize my chances of finding leverage points. And my 3rd principle is really just to take small bites. And that means don't take on a big chunk of work at any one time. Make sure that I take on a piece of work that I can hopefully finish within a single day. And I think that's true in many cases, but for me, this is really important. And most of my days are actually about 5 to 6 hours long to having to go and get my kids and so on. So it's really about taking as smaller bites as possible, getting those wins, and keeping momentum. I might add more principles later, but I think those are good ones for now. So let's have a look at the application architecture. Then I'll just walk you through. Put that over there. What this looks like. So again, for the people who are not technical, feel free to skip over this section. So the app itself is primarily being built in Next.js, which is a JavaScript framework that sits on top of Node runtime. And what that basically means is it gives me a framework for building a web application. And inside that Next.js/React/Tailwind/Next.UI layer, so that's my user interface layer, that layer building a number of modules. So boards we'll talk about in a second, but chat should be very familiar if you seen my other stuff around strategy GPT. So we'll be rehoming that into that chat space. We'll be looking at things like reports and generating content. And then, of course, we've got our strategic profile and then other things, so settings and billings and so on. Three key, maybe not frameworks, but maybe libraries to call out. One is React Flow. That is a node-based, visual node-based, I should say, a framework for building applications where you can have nodes and connections and put them on a 2D canvas. Also making heavy use of the Vercel AI SDK, so that provides a wrapper around the large language models, and it is actually very useful for providing the streaming capability. So that's where when you ask the models for something, and instead of waiting 10 seconds for the full response, it starts streaming the response immediately. So usually after a few seconds, it starts pushing out some of the text. Had some experience with Frigade. I hope that's how you pronounce it. That's an onboarding framework or an onboarding platform, and that just lets you really easily come up with those next types of flows that really help users understand how to use an application. And so I think for me, onboarding is sometimes really annoying. You go to apps and they keep asking you to do things, but I think for an app like this, it'll be really important to explain how to use it properly. On the back end, it's primarily using something called Supabase, which is a combination of open source technologies that are hosted by that company, and they provide, I guess, a cloud hosted version of a number of different things. Primarily, there's a database. They also provide authentication, and they also provide a real-time API. And I think one thing that could be really interesting would be having multiplayer experiences in this app. So as a team that's working on a strategy or working together potentially at the same time, being able to see each other's updates simultaneously, I think it's going to be really interesting. Also using something called Snaplet. And that is a data, what you call it, sort of like a synthetic data populator or seeder. And I've done many applications in my history. And the thing that always impacts you is your production data is vastly different than the data you use when you're developing. Many times I've seen things that were very fast and really responsive in development, and then as soon as they get to production, they're very slow. That's just one thing around the data volumes, but there's also things around the different types of data that people put in, names, addresses, and so on, that can cause issues. And what that Snaplet tool will do is it create synthetic data, so that in development, I can have a data set that's as large as what potentially be in production. Looking at something called ingest for durable workflows. What this is when you have like a change that happens in the system and you want to run it in a way that happens even if there's an error. So sometimes we get exceptions or we get errors on the screen, and then you need to redo something. That's what we want to avoid. We want to be able to capture the intent that someone had on an update or a action or a request. Then we can put it into this, and sometimes we call it queue. And if it fails processing, we can store it in that queue. I can resolve the issue why it failed, and then replay that message back through. So obviously Stripe is a pretty obvious pick for subscriptions and billing. So I've created an integration with that. And just lastly, on the kind of platform services is Transpond, which is what I use for email marketing. They've got an API around email sending. And then at the bottom layer, we've got AI services. So Microsoft has a framework called Prompt Flow. And this is something that you can use to run long-running AI workflows, things like multi-agent. So this would be where you have a couple of agents working together to coordinate to achieve an outcome. So there's a couple of examples. There's a product or a framework called AutoGen. You can wrap that up inside PromptFlow. And the way that works is you create, for example, a manager manager AI, a copywriter AI, and a copy editor AI. And you give the manager a task and say, go and write me a report on this topic. It then coordinates the copy editor to be able to do the research. And then when the research has been done, it then hands that off to the copy editor, who then reviews how that's been written, and then will rewrite it as needed, and then the manager will respond back with the response. So there's some interesting possibilities, I think, there around, we talked earlier about what are the problems that some people are seeing, and that's around environment scanning and understanding what's out there. This kind of multi-agent workflow could be something that would be useful for that. So, giving a high-level command, go and do some searches online to find authoritative sources on a topic, summarize them, and then provide back a summarized report across all of those sources would be an example there. The other thing PromptFlow does is prompt testing, and what you can do is start assigning different values to how prompts are performing, and then over time you can see how that prompt, if you need to change it to make it more successful. And then, of course, there's the AI models themselves, right? So we've got OpenAI, Anthropic, and any day now, Google will open up access to their top line model, Gemini Ultra, through the API, in which case I'll find a way to support that. So that's the application stack, subject to change. I mean, a lot of these technologies are plug and play. You can remove them and put something else in. There is a lot of stuff out there I have to choose from. So I'm very confident that if any of these components are working, they'll be quite an easy way to replace them. So I just wanted to also talk a little bit about what the UI could look like and some of the thoughts that I've been thinking about. And this has to go around with the idea of a board. And I can, there's been a few demos or a few examples out there of people creating 2D boards that have different nodes, so different boxes, I guess, that then connect to other ones. And people have been using that for things like chat, obviously using it for other kind of use cases where you want to show a graph between different objects. And the idea here is that in trying to solve creating this strategy, are there things that, or could we express that in a way that exists on a board? And the idea is that in the development of a strategy or working your way through a problem, there's a number of tasks. And if you can imagine, we could sequence a number of these tasks one after another, and perhaps these tasks could be something like trend analysis, scenarios, stress testing, impacts, and courses of action. And you can then kind of think about, as you do your trend analysis, you could interact with that node to then come to a conclusion of what do you think are your trends. You could then create a scenario node and then create a link between the trends that you found to those scenarios, and that's how you would then express the trends that belong into that scenario. And perhaps there's some dials where you could say, how much is it of this trend do you think is an impact, or what features of the trend do you think are impacting? You could then have a scenario node, which could have its own user interface, I suppose, and you could then interact with that in a different way. And then go on to create the other nodes in the sequence. So this is where I want to get to, hopefully towards the end of June, or probably let's say July. But we'll see what kind of progress we can make. But that's sort of the basic idea. And, the devil will be in the details about how well can you source information for the trends, and how easy can you create the scenarios, and all the rest of the interface details, of course. So that's sort of an update of the architecture. But let's have a little bit of a demo. So I've only been working on this for 2 weeks. There's really not much to show. But we've got a login screen, which I can then type in my email. And one thing or a choice that I've made is to not have passwords. This will all be passwordless, which means that you'll get a login link like this each time. And the reason why I made those choices is that, a couple things. One, asking people to manage passwords is sometimes difficult. Two, there's a lot of additional complexity around forgotten passwords and things like that. And given that this could be potentially an application where people will have some sensitivities around storing information, they may want to have higher assurance that it's not being accessed by unauthorized parties. And so you end up doing things like multi-factor authentication anyway. So you're asking for people to, again, find a code in their email or through an authenticator app or something like that. So I thought I would just skip all of that and then just go straight to asking or providing a clickable link in your email that you can get. So I'm just grabbing that link from my email, just put it in here, and then we can sign it. So in future, I want to support something that's called passkeys. You may have come across these before. It would be really great. We're just not at that point to be able to support it. So this is the framework where I've got things so far. This literally is all there is to it. So there's the navigation on the left, which we can collapse and expand. And then there's some additional settings that we could didn't have here. So a lot of this work is really just creating the framework for the application. There's a few more things to do. So the next set of tasks, or the next little task I have, which again is a small bite, is to add internationalization. So there's no reason why this app should be multilingual. It's very easy to get an AI to translate everything. So I'm definitely going to be doing that. And then the next step after this will be to rehome Strategy GPT chat in here. And then we'll move on to doing the boards. So that's all we have for an update this week. So I'll probably be back in a fortnight or so, hopefully showing you an AI chat embedded in this application. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next time.